I left my ranch for 12 days, just 12, and somehow in that time, a man in polished boots and a company logo managed to do something the drought, the county, and even time itself hadn't managed in 30 years. He shut off my water. Not by accident either. Not some storm damage or busted pipe. No. He built a fence. A clean, expensive, 6-foot cedar fence, right across the head of my irrigation ditch like he was drawing a line in the sand and saying, "This far and no further." And the thing is, he almost got away with it. When I pulled back onto my land that afternoon, dust kicking up behind my truck, everything fell off before I even saw it. You ever get that feeling? Like the land itself is trying to tell you something's wrong. My cattle weren't scattered like usual. They were clustered near the dry edge of the south pasture, pacing slow, restless, the kind of movement that says they're already feeling it thirst. I stepped out, boots hitting dirt, and followed the ditch line out of habit. Same path I've walked 1,000 times, except this time, it just ended. Not naturally, not faded out, just stopped. And there it was. That fence. Straight as a ruler, fresh stains still shining in the sun, cutting clean across the mouth of the ditch like it had always been there. But it hadn't. That ditch had been running longer than that subdivision had even existed as an idea. 30 years of water flow, documented, recorded, signed off at the county level, written into my deed so clear you could read it from 10 feet away. An easement. A legal one. Not a handshake deal. Not some neighborly favor or right. And yet, someone decided it didn't matter. Zip-tied to one of my fence posts was a piece of paper, printed, corporate font. No signature, just that cold, detached tone that companies love to use when they're doing something shady but want it to sound official. In accordance with drainage improvement protocols, the channel has been redirected for structural safety compliance. Compliance. I remember actually laughing when I read that. Not because it was funny, but because it was so absurd it didn't even feel real. My water, redirected into what exactly? Their lawn irrigation system? Their decorative pond? I looked past the fence and there it was, that brand new subdivision. Rows of identical houses, all beige and gray, fake grass so perfect it didn't even pretend to be alive. And right in the center, like some kind of monument to bad priorities, a fountain. Running. Nonstop. Water shooting up into the air like they had more than they knew what to do with, while my pasture sat there drying out 1 inch at a time. That's when it hit me. This wasn't a mistake. This was a decision. Someone looked at that ditch, looked at their development plans, and decided my water was inconvenient. And inconvenience, apparently, was enough reason to erase 30 years of legal reality. I walked the fence line slow, hands in my pockets, not angry yet, just thinking. Because anger, that's easy. Anybody can get mad. But out here, if you react too fast, you lose. You've got to let it settle, let it sharpen. Fury's like a blade, best used when it's steady. And I knew one thing for sure. Easements don't just disappear because someone builds over them. They become violations. Big ones. The kind that cost money. A lot of money. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with a stack of old records, paperwork I hadn't needed to look at in years, original filings, water usage logs, maps stamped by the county, all of it still intact, still valid. I made 3 calls. First, my attorney. Not the kind that sends polite letters, the kind that files things fast and lets the other side panic later. Second, the county water board. Because when you mess with water rights out here, you're not just dealing with land, you're dealing with law that runs deeper than most people understand. And third, a guy I hadn't talked to in a while, ranch rights specialist, the kind of lawyer who doesn't advertise because the people who need him already know his name. By sunrise, things were already moving. Paperwork filed, complaints logged, injunction in motion. And sure enough, within 48 hours, my phone rang. Unknown number. I let it ring once, twice, then picked up. Smooth voice on the other end, polished, practiced, the kind that's trained to calm people down before they realize how bad things actually are. Mr. Carter, I believe there's been a misunderstanding. I'd heard that line before, and I almost smiled, because when someone starts with misunderstanding, what they usually mean is they're already worried. I let him talk, didn't interrupt, just listened as he explained how the development had made necessary adjustments, how they were committed to resolving the situation amicably, how they valued good relationships with neighboring landowners. All the right words, all in the wrong order. When he finally paused, I set the papers down in front of me, leaned back in my chair, and said it plain. You buried a legal easement under 6 feet of cedar and concrete. Silence. Just for a second, but it was there. That's not a misunderstanding. That's a violation. And right then, I knew this wasn't going to end with a simple apology. This was going to get expensive. Now, let me pause the story for a second, because this is where a lot of people get it twisted, especially folks who haven't dealt with land, water, or HOA-style developments before. According to standard procedure, when a developer acquires land next to an existing property, they are legally required to perform what's called due diligence, meaning they have to review recorded easements, water rights, access paths, all of it. Not optional, not if convenient. It's baked into the process. And here's the thing most people don't realize. An easement isn't just a suggestion. It's not like a handshake deal you can renegotiate later. It's attached to the land itself, which means even if ownership changes, that right stays exactly where it is. From a legal perspective, building over an easement without permission isn't just careless. It's considered obstruction, and depending on the state, it can escalate into property rights interference or even forced removal orders, which courts do not take lightly, especially when water is involved. And water, that's a whole different level. In the Western U.S., water rights operate under doctrines that are older than most of the towns themselves, meaning whoever has documented use, especially agricultural use, usually has priority that developers can't just override because it's inconvenient. But here's where it gets interesting. This situation isn't just legal, it's psychological. This is a psychological trap developers fall into all the time. They operate in environments where money solves most problems, so they start believing everything has a price, including rights that were never for sale in the first place. That mindset leads to decisions like this. Cut first, negotiate later, because they assume the other party will fold under pressure or accept a payout. And most of the time, people do. But every now and then, they run into someone who understands the system just as well as they do, maybe even better, and that's when things start to shift. The lesson here is, when someone ignores a legal boundary that's been in place for decades, they're not just making a mistake, they're placing a bet, and if they bet wrong, the cost isn't just financial. It's reputational, operational, and sometimes existential for the entire project. By the time that call ended, I could already feel the shift happening. Not on my land, but on theirs. See, when you've been around this kind of thing long enough, you start to recognize the tone, the pauses, the careful wording. That lawyer wasn't calling to explain. He was calling to assess damage, to figure out just how bad this had already gotten and whether they could still contain it. And the truth was, they were already late. Because while he was talking about amicable solutions, my attorney had already filed the injunction, and not the soft kind either. We're talking emergency filing, fast track, same week review, the kind that puts a judge in front of your paperwork before the other side even finishes their morning coffee. And I didn't stop there. I drove out to the south pasture that afternoon with a drone, something I'd picked up a year back mostly for checking fence lines and cattle spread, nothing fancy, but that day, it became evidence. I flew it low across the field, slow passes over cracked soil, patches of dry grass curling up like paper, cattle clustered near what used to be the water flow. Then I took it higher, angled it just right so you could see over that brand new cedar fence. And there it was, clear as day, their subdivision. Green. Artificial, sure, but green. And right in the center, that fountain, still running like it didn't have a care in the world. Water shooting 10, maybe 15 feet into the air, sparkling in the sunlight while my land dried out below it. The contrast was undeniable. I didn't need to narrate it. The footage spoke for itself. That same evening, I sent it over to a local reporter I knew, small station, but they loved stories like this. Real people, real conflict, especially when it involved land and development. By the next morning, it was on air. Not prime time, nothing national, but it didn't need to be. Around here, word travels faster than any broadcast signal. And just like that, the pressure shifted. Because now this wasn't just a misunderstanding between neighbors, this was a story. A bad one. For them. 3 days later, I got another call, different tone this time, less polished, a little tighter around the edges. Mr. Carter, we'd like to revisit a resolution. I let that hang for a second, stepped out onto my porch, looked out over that same dry pasture. You mean the one you already created? Silence again. It's funny how quiet people get when they realize control is slipping. But they weren't done trying. End of that week, the developer himself showed up. I saw him pull in. Big truck, spotless, the kind that's never hauled anything heavier than ego. He stepped out wearing jeans that looked brand new, boots that had never met mud, and that smile, that confident, practiced smile that says he's used to walking into situations and walking out on top. "Mr. Carter," he said, extending a hand like we were about to close a deal, not clean up a mess he created. "I think we can make this right." I didn't take the hand, just stood there, arms crossed, let him talk. He walked me through it like it was a business pitch. Compensation for inconvenience, expedited payment, assurances that they valued community relationships, all the usual language. Then he named a number. Decent number too, I'll give him that. For a second, I just looked at him, not saying anything. And I could see it in his face. He thought that was it. That this was the moment where I'd nod, shake his hand, and this whole thing would go away. That's the psychological trap right there. Thinking money closes every door it opens. I finally spoke, kept my voice level calm. "You know what inconvenience is." He blinked, caught off guard. "A flat tire. A delayed shipment. That's inconvenience." I took a step closer, just enough so he couldn't pretend this was still casual. "What you did was cut off a water source for 200 head of cattle in the middle of summer." That smile faded, just a little. "That's not inconvenience, that's damage." He shifted his weight, tone changing, a little sharper now. "We're trying to avoid escalation here." I almost laughed at that. "You passed escalation when you built that fence." That was the moment things turned. No more friendly negotiation, no more soft language. He mentioned countersuits, construction delays, financial impact. I let him finish, then just nodded once. "Go ahead," because by then, it didn't matter. The footage was out. The injunction was filed. And what he hadn't fully realized yet was that his real problem wasn't me. It was his buyers. See, people don't spend hundreds of thousands on a home just to get tied up in a legal fight before they even move in. And once that story hit, the calls started coming in, not to me, to him. Potential buyers asking questions. Existing contracts getting nervous. Title companies flagging the property because now there was a recorded dispute tied to the land. That's the kind of thing that spreads fast and sticks even faster. Within 2 weeks, the tone changed completely. No more threats. No more posturing. Just quiet, controlled urgency. Another meeting, this time at my place. No truck showmanship, no big entrance. Just him and his lawyer. They laid it out simple. They'd remove the fence, restore the ditch, cover repair costs, settle damages. Clean, straightforward. And for a moment, that probably would have sounded reasonable to anyone else. But here's the thing. By that point, this wasn't about going back to the way things were. Because the way things were left room for this to happen in the first place. I leaned back in my chair, looked at both of them, and said, "No, you could feel it land. Not loud, not dramatic, just final." The lawyer adjusted in his seat, started to respond, but I held up a hand. "You don't get to hit reset like nothing happened." Then I laid out my terms. If they wanted this resolved, really resolved, then we were going to fix it properly. Not a ditch. A pipeline. Underground, secured, built to last. No more exposure, no more interference. Second, a new easement, permanently recorded, expanded beyond the original, triple the flow capacity. Not because I needed it right now, but because if they were going to touch my land once, they weren't going to get the chance again. And third, compensation. Not for inconvenience. For impact. 2 full years' worth of projected losses. Livestock, pasture, everything that could have gone wrong because of what they did. I didn't raise my voice, didn't push, just laid it out like terms on a table. Take it or leave it. The room went quiet. The developer looked at his lawyer, that confidence from before gone. Because now this wasn't a negotiation he controlled anymore. This was damage control. And after a long minute, the lawyer nodded. Not to me. To him. That was the moment it ended. Papers were drawn up within days. Signed shortly after. The fence stayed exactly where it was, but underneath it, they ran that pipeline. Exactly like I said. Reinforced, inspected, documented. The new easement went on record, permanent, expanded, untouchable. And the settlement, let's just say it covered more than what I lost. When it was all done, I walked back out to that south pasture, same place where this whole thing started. Water was flowing again, steady, quiet, like it had been for decades. The cattle spread out, grazing like nothing had ever happened. And just beyond that fence, that fountain was still running. But now, it didn't bother me anymore. Because the difference was, they finally understood something they should have known from the start. Out here, water isn't a feature. It's not decoration. It's not optional. It's law. Now, if you're listening to this thinking, well, that worked out pretty nicely for you. Yeah, it did. But not because I got lucky, and not because I'm some kind of genius rancher-lawyer hybrid. It worked because I understood something that a lot of people overlook until it's too late. I knew where the real leverage was. And it wasn't in yelling louder, or threatening back, or trying to outmuscle a developer with deeper pockets. It was in patience, documentation, and timing. The lesson here is, most conflicts like this aren't won in the moment they happen. They're won years before. When you take the time to put things on paper, to record rights properly, to make sure that what's yours is actually protected beyond just everyone knows it. Because once someone decides to ignore that, now it's not your word against theirs. It's them against a system that was designed to outlast both of you. And that's a fight most developers don't actually want once it becomes real. From a legal perspective, what saved me wasn't just the existence of the easement, it was the clarity of it. Clean records, consistent use, no ambiguity. Courts don't like gray areas, and neither do title companies. The moment that dispute got recorded, it didn't just become my problem anymore. It became theirs, their buyers, their lenders, everybody tied to that land. That's the ripple effect people underestimate. And here's where it gets even more interesting, because this wasn't just about law, it was about psychology too. This is a psychological trap that shows up in a lot of situations, not just land disputes, when one side operates from the assumption that the other side will eventually fold. Developers deal with that all the time. They negotiate, they push boundaries, they count on people wanting a quick resolution over a correct one. And to be fair, most people do take the quick way out. It's easier, less stress, faster money. But the moment you don't, the entire dynamic changes. Suddenly, they're the ones reacting. They're the ones calculating risk. They're the ones trying to minimize damage. And that shift, that's where outcomes get decided. According to standard procedure, once a legal conflict starts affecting marketability, meaning people can't easily buy, sell, or insure a property, that's when companies move fast, not because they suddenly care more, but because now the cost of doing nothing is higher than the cost of fixing it. That's exactly what happened here. It wasn't the fence that hurt them, it was the uncertainty. Buyers hesitating, contracts stalling, questions they couldn't answer cleanly anymore. That's the kind of pressure no spreadsheet can ignore. So if you take anything from this, let it be this. Know your rights, but more importantly, make sure they're provable. Keep records. Understand what's attached to your land, your home, your agreements. Because when something goes wrong, and it will, sooner or later, you don't want to be figuring it out in the middle of the fight. You want to already be standing on solid ground. And at the same time, don't underestimate the human side of it. People don't always act logically. Sometimes they act out of convenience, ego, pressure, or just plain habit. That developer didn't wake up one morning thinking, I'm going to break the law today. He made a series of decisions that felt small in the moment, each one justified by progress, deadlines, or cost, until suddenly, he was standing in the middle of a problem he couldn't buy his way out of the way he expected. That happens more often than you'd think. Small shortcuts, big consequences. So yeah, water was the issue in my case. But the real story? It's about boundaries. Legal ones, personal ones, and the ones people test when they think no one's paying attention. The lesson here is someone will always test those lines at some point. The question is, what happens when they do? Do you fold, take the quick fix, and move on? Or do you hold the line and make them deal with the full weight of what they crossed? That choice, that's where your outcome starts. And I'm curious, if you were in that position, would you have taken the check and walked away, or pushed it all the way like I did?